Sonny's words hung in the air, contrasted starkly against his polite smile. The two young masters seemed frozen, as if unable to digest what they had just heard. Mercy of Clan Dagonet let out a stifled breath. At the same time, Ascended Tristan's eyes widened. His face, frozen in a state of stunned disbelief, was slowly contorted by a grimace of righteous wrath. Trembling in outrage, he bellowed, "You dare?" Sonny couldn't quite believe it. He held his breath, his heart beating wildly. Is he going to say it? He's going to say it. He totally is. His smile remained perfectly pleasant. I do dare. Why wasn't that obvious from my remark? Or has your flaw made you deaf? Goodness gracious, dumb and deaf. What an unfortunate fate. You have my sympathy. The young master stared at him, mouth agape. After a few moments of silence, Tristan pointed a trembling finger at Sonny and hissed, "You are courting death, mongrel." He said it. He had really said it. Sonny had no words. It was really too astonishing. He struggled to suppress a burst of laughter. Amazing. But also, what is it with legacy brats and calling people mongrels? Sonny kept his composure with titanic effort and shrugged. Funny you should say, but I am indeed somewhat of a mongrel. His smile widened, which seemed to send the young master into a spiral. With his face turning a concerning shade of red, Ascended Tristan outstretched a hand and growled, "You've gone too far, scoundrel. You need to be taught a lesson. I, Tristan of Aegis Rose, hereby challenge you to a duel." Sonny blinked. Huh? Hearing these words, young Master Tristan paled. You don't even have a single memory weapon, and you call yourself an Ascended? Sonny scratched the back of his head, his face full of embarrassment. I do call myself an Ascended, but not all Ascended are like you, scions of storied legacy clans. Personally, I manage a small cafe and a shop. The last time I was in a battle, I had to run away and barely escaped with my life. It had been a battle against a cursed tyrant, but they didn't have to know that. Master Mercy seemed relieved. He let out a long sigh and said tentatively, Then let us drop this matter. Tristan, he is clearly not a... But his friend shook his head furiously, summoning a memory. No, I simply can't let this matter rest. I demand satisfaction. Soon a heavy greatsword manifested itself from sparks of light. He scoffed contemptuously and shoved the sword into Sonny's hands. Here, this sword is called the Heartbreaker. It is a family heirloom of my clan. I'll lend it to you for today. It is your privilege to be able to hold it, knave. With that, he shook his head and mumbled under his breath. Really, I just don't understand why Lady Nephis would associate with such a profligate wastrel. He must have deceived her with his looks, the scoundrel. Sonny held the great sword awkwardly and rested its tip on the ground. No, really, what was this situation? Why was the person who had challenged him to a duel supplying him with a powerful weapon to fight that duel? Was Master Tristan actually brainless? At the same time, the young man in question summoned another memory, this one a much lighter arming sword. From the looks of it, he was giving his opponent an advantage, a better weapon with a longer reach. He also dismissed the outer layers of his armor, leaving only a gambeson jacket behind. Here, I won't use any enchantment so you won't be at a disadvantage. Are you ready? Sonny remained silent for a moment, then shrugged timidly. I guess I am. Young Master Tristan grinned. Then here I come. Prepare to be humbled, wimp. He brandished his sword and lunged forward. Under the dubious gazes of everyone gathered in the courtyard, the duel started. It seemed like the diminutive Master Sunless, an unknown Ascended from the Lakeshore settlement, had no chance against the young master of the Aegis Rose clan. Not only was Tristan much taller and more powerfully built, but he was also a legacy. and legacies still held the title of the most skilled and deadly warriors of humanity, by far. Even now that the number of awakened had swelled, their upbringing, training, and martial culture were all designed to produce lethal fighters to rule the battlefield unopposed. The idle onlookers did not know what the pretty young man had done to enrage the legacy scion so much, but from the looks of it, he was in for a good beating, which was a shame considering that with his jade skin and slender figure, he looked quite handsome. Sadly, though, he didn't look like much of a fighter. Neither did Master Sunless seem very familiar with handling a blade. He tried to swing the provided greatsword to deflect an incoming attack, but failed. Not just that perhaps due to his short stature and slender build, he actually lost control of the heavy blade and allowed its weight to pull him off balance. Instead of deflecting the opponent's sword, he yelped and stumbled forward instead. That was a common mistake, most often seen among awakened. Young awakened were prone to overestimating their newfound strength, forgetting that their mass and center of gravity remained the same, so it was easy for them to misjudge things and end up being pulled forward by the inertia of their own swing. Still, for a master to be that inexperienced in combat was a bit... The delicate ascendant seemed to be doomed. But strangely enough, he ended up being saved by his clumsy mistake. It was doubtful that he could have deflected Tristan's powerful strike, but after stumbling forward and nearly sprawling on the ground, the opponent's sword missed and flew harmlessly above his head. There was a murmur among the onlookers. Lucky! But then they were treated to a bizarre spectacle. That Master Sunless was not just lucky. It was as if he was charmed. No matter what Tristan of Aegis Rose tried to do, his sword never seemed able to reach the cowardly opponent. Master Sunless slipped on the cobblestones, accidentally evading a skillful attack. While trying to stand up, he tripped on the hem of his own silk robe, losing balance and gracelessly sprawling on the ground, but also making Tristan's follow-up strike miss him entirely. While trying to block a downward slash, he actually failed to hold on to his sword and dropped it, staggering back in panic. However, in the process, the coward accidentally kicked the falling sword and sent it flying in the direction of the legacy scion, who was forced to hastily defend his lower torso and retreat. Then Master Sunless recklessly bent down to pick up the fallen sword, a grievous mistake when facing an armed opponent. However, it was exactly because no one in their right mind would think of leaving themselves so open to a lethal blow that Tristan had never anticipated it, once again fruitlessly slicing the empty air above the oblivious opponent's head.
What are you doing? Fight like a man!
A sheepish smile appeared on the unknown master's deathly pale face.
But I was trying to pick up my sword. How am I supposed to fight without a sword?
Ascended Tristan let out an infuriated growl.
Just take it. Damn, I'll step back.
Under everyone's bewildered gazes, he took a step back and waited patiently for his opponent to arm himself. But Master Sunless did not seem to be in a hurry. Breathing heavily, Tristan's face twitched.
What are you doing?
The delicate young man coughed.
Well, you didn't specify that I should pick it up immediately, did you? So I thought I'd catch my breath real quick.
The legacy scion seemed stuck between complete disbelief and apoplectic fury.
Pick it up right this second.
Master Sunless bent down and gripped the sword.
All right, there's no need to shout.
Soon the oddly comical duel continued. Coincidentally, or rather quite purposefully, the sun was directly behind him, which meant that his shadow was sprawled on the cobblestones directly in front of him, right where ascended Tristan's foot had just landed. Using a tiny bit of essence, Sunny stealthily manifested a small part of the wild shadow and made it trip the poor fool without anyone noticing. That was more than enough to send the enraged young master, who had committed to the attack a little bit too hard, completely off balance. It all worked splendidly. In fact, it worked a little bit too well.
Oh, crap.
Sunny had forgotten to take one small but vitally important detail into account. In the next moment, everyone in the courtyard witnessed a startling scene. Ascended Tristan of the Aegis Rose clan lunged at the dainty master, who let out an embarrassing shriek and flinched away in fear. By doing so, he not only completely avoided the sudden attack, but also caused the legacy to lose balance and be pulled forward by the weight of his sword. And there, right behind his cowardly opponent, was the parapet of the courtyard ramparts. The young legacy had no time to slow down and collided with it at full speed, buckling at the waist and flying over the stone parapet in the blink of an eye. A split second later, his figure disappeared from view. A dumbfounded silence settled over the courtyard. In a few moments, everyone shuddered as they heard a loud crash from somewhere far below. Master Sunless looked back with a strange expression on his face, then cleared his throat and gracefully straightened his mantle with an elegant motion. Then he turned to Mercy of Clan Dagonet and said, his voice full of sincere concern,
Sir Mercy, why are you dawdling? Shouldn't you hurry up and tend to your friend? Such a fall won't kill him, I think, but he'll certainly need a good healer.
The petrified young man slowly nodded.
Yes, I'll go.
With that, he turned and hurried away. But at that moment, Master Sunless called out to him.
Wait a moment.
Ascended Mercy froze and slowly turned around.
Yes?
Sunny smiled and pointed to the heavy greatsword laying on the ground.
The sword, what was it? The Heartbreaker? Take the sword with you.
The young master stared at the greatsword for a moment, then bent down to pick it up.
Yes.
He mumbled an apology and dashed away. Sunny grinned.
Make sure that Ascended Tristan takes his time to rest and recuperate. There's no need to rush.
He sighed and then added, his voice full of magnanimity.
He can beg me for forgiveness at a later date.
When Nephis returned, the courtyard seemed a little livelier than it had been before. A few people had strange expressions on their faces, and a few more seemed to be glancing at Master Sunless from time to time, their gazes full of contempt and amusement. The charming enchanter himself was standing near the parapet of the ramparts, not paying the pointed gazes any attention. He was looking down calmly, a small smile playing across his lips. Nephis frowned slightly. Has anyone bothered him? She had not anticipated that leaving Master Sunless alone for a few minutes would be a problem. It was only an hour or two after they had shown themselves together in public, after all. No matter what kind of rumors people wanted to spread, such things took time. Nephis definitely did not want anything remotely unpleasant to happen to the delicate young man, so she had to be more watchful in the future. Approaching Master Sunless, she said in her usual even tone, I am back. Did something happen? He turned and looked at her with a smile, then lowered his gaze awkwardly.
Well, nothing too serious. There were a couple young men who wanted to have words with me. I'm afraid I failed to resolve the issue amicably. Oh well, some people simply don't have manners. I'm rather used to such situations.
Nephis's frown deepened. Sunny, of course, was talking about himself. It was Sunny who didn't bother with basic manners unless he wanted to, and was therefore used to facing the violent consequences of running his venomous mouth. But Nephis understood it differently. Cassia, who were these young men, and how dare they be rude to Master Sunless? Cassia responded a moment later, her voice deceptively smooth. Tristan of Aegis Rose challenged Master Sunless to a duel. Nephis almost jumped. Of course, her calm expression remained the same, but her mind was suddenly awash with scorching flames. And you didn't warn me? I explicitly asked you to keep an eye on him in my absence. That will also clearly show the other clans that I favor Master Sunless, and that touching the person I favor, pretending to favor, will not go unpunished. Which could further the deception and at the same time protect the charming enchanter going forward, thus killing two birds with one stone. Nephis took a deep breath, still feeling guilty. Then she contained her emotions, nodded lightly, and said, "Then please, follow me. There won't be any other delays." Master Sunless smiled and gallantly gestured forward.
"After you, my lady."
As they ascended the steps of the tall tower, Nephis remained silent and thought back to what Cassia had said. What is it with me today indeed? Many people thought that Nephis was a cold and emotionless person, but they were all wrong. Her emotions, in fact, often burned with a frightening intensity. It was just that she rarely showed them, if at all. Still, looking back, she felt like she had been too flustered in the last few hours, and even before that. Being in the company of the charming enchanter had a strange kind of effect on her. Granted, anyone would have been flustered after what Effie had done. Just thinking about it. Nephis refused to think about it. But it was an undeniable fact that she couldn't help but act unlike her usual self around Master Sunless. Usually, she would have been much more guarded around a stranger, but there was just something about the delicate young man that made her lower her guard. It was like an odd sense of familiarity that had no reason to exist, but was deeply compelling, as if he reminded her of something or someone that she had been longing for without even knowing. How strange. The feeling was indeed strange, but not unwelcome. It tasted a little sweet and a little bitter. But mostly it was just there. Nephis sighed. My behavior thus far has been nothing short of embarrassing. Considering that the two of us will be spending a lot of time together, I really need to maintain composure and treat Master Sunless with the degree of respect he deserves. She glanced at him, her gaze once again lingering on his exquisite features and glistening onyx eyes for a moment too long. Suddenly, Nephis felt that maintaining composure would be a bit hard. Following Nephis, Sunny ascended the tall tower and found himself on a spacious balcony that served as a pier for the chainbreaker. Neither of them had spoken about the duel, and it suited him just fine. In any case, he had to admit that his actions had been a little naughty. He could have defused the situation by groveling a little, but had chosen to antagonize the pompous legacy instead, for no good reason. Explaining the sequence of events to Nephis would have been a bit embarrassing, and so Sunny went ahead and shamelessly pushed that responsibility onto Cassia. The chain breaker was floating in the air a few meters away, with a wide wooden plank affixed between its deck and the stone balcony. Several firekeepers seemed to have just finished loading a bunch of wooden crates into the cargo hold of the graceful vessel, and were now resting beneath the branches of the sacred tree. Noticing Nephis, all of them stood up. Then their gazes fell on Sunny. The firekeepers, especially the two women, had a bit of a strange reaction to his appearance.
What's wrong with these people?
Considering how devoted the firekeepers were to Nephis, he would have expected a more intense version of the jealous hostility the denizens of the castle had met him with. However, they seemed more stunned than unfriendly. Master Sunless, why are you here? He forced out a polite smile.
Good day. Oh, I am here to sign a contract. I think we'll be working together often in the future. So please, take care of me.
The firekeepers slowly turned to Nephis. Then the two women suddenly broke into wide smiles.
Lady Nephis, thank you. Nice.
He stared at them in confusion.
Why are they giving her thumbs up?
The firekeepers frequented the brilliant emporium due to their friendship with Eiko. Perhaps they really liked his cooking and assumed that he would be employed as a chef. Was the food situation on Ivory Island that bad? Nephis coughed. Yes, I've invited Master Sunless to the tower. Please, get ready to ascend. They joined the firekeepers on the deck. The wooden plank was swiftly removed, the mooring cables untied, and no more than a minute later, the flying ship slowly moved. The leaves of the sacred tree rustled as the chain breaker started to climb into the sky. Sunny looked up and studied it for a while, his gaze lingering on the golden fruits.
What would happen if I fed these fruits to Rain?
Currently, Rain was preparing to hunt an awakened demon in order to absorb some of its essence and push her own toward awakening. Such was the path that the ancient people had followed, forging their fates in the crucible of combat. The fruits of the sacred tree contained essence as well, so its existence was much more precious than the carriers of the spell could ever imagine. Granted, it was a rhetorical question. If Sunny simply wanted Rain to awaken, he would have showered her with soul shards and be done with it. But what he wanted was to make her strong enough to survive on her own if need be, and so cutting corners would do her more harm than good. Everyone who received a proper education did, but Sunny had only ever known how to type things before coming to the academy. He had learned cursive later, after returning from the Forgotten Shore and getting himself a position as a research assistant. But of course, no one had any way of knowing that. Sighing deeply, he looked over the contract and signed it. Nephis watched him intently as he did. The moment his signature was put on paper, the corner of her mouth seemed to curl upward slightly. Sunny smiled.
Well, as long as she's happy. It is a pleasure doing business with you.
And that was how Sunny became the memory purveyor of the Firekeepers. Unbeknownst to him, though, something else was happening while he was signing the contract. The news of Sunny's duel with Tristan of Aegis Rose was spreading across Bastion with the speed of a forest fire. Of course, with each retelling, it collected embellishments and turned more and more outrageous. People were talking about it all over the city.
Have you heard? Some unknown master defeated Lord Tristan in one strike.
They say that they were fighting for Changing Star's affection.
There were several Valor Knights and dozens of Awakened in the courtyard, but no one even tried to stop the duel.
There were dozens of Valor Knights in the courtyard trying to stop him, but he defeated them all before striking Lord Tristan in the face.
There were 100 Valor Knights in the courtyard trying to stop him, but he easily defeated them all, and then beheaded Lord Tristan with one strike.
That unknown master is too scary, too tyrannical.
What a monster.
If Sunny had heard these whispers, he would have paled. He would have also probably said something like,
Oh no, not again.
But he didn't hear anything. Until the next morning, when Eiko stormed into the kitchen of the Brilliant Emporium and tossed a newspaper on the table.
Boss, what the hell is this?
Frowning, Sunny picked up the newspaper and read the title on the first page. The title read, A Duel for a Saint's Heart. Wretched Mongrel, Master S, defeats the noblest of knights, Lord T. His hand trembled. The stars shone brightly in the cold black sky. Sitting on a wide tree branch, Rain studied them silently, surrounded by darkness.
It's strange.
Some of the stars looked familiar, but she couldn't recognize any constellations. The alien sky of the dream realm was different from that of Earth, but worse than that, it was both fickle and unreliable. The stars shining upon the song domain were different from those illuminating the sword domain, and even various regions of the two kingdoms did not share the same heaven. Some places did not even have a sun, while others were bathed in the light of many moons. Astronomers were probably going crazy.
Why are you still awake? Sleep. You'll need your strength tomorrow.
Her teacher's voice resounded softly from the darkness, making Rain sigh. He was right. She had climbed the enormous tree and tied herself to the branch in order to rest. But now that there was nothing else left to do,
I can't sleep.
Sleep was eluding her. Her teacher chuckled.
Nervous?
Rain remained silent for a while. Was she nervous? She couldn't tell. They had spent a lot of time preparing for this hunt, from searching for suitable prey and learning all that could be learned about it, to coming up with plans and contingencies, studying the terrain, and preparing all the necessary equipment. The process was only different from all the previous hunts because it had been so extensive. She was supposed to kill an awakened demon this time, after all. So Rain did feel a little nervous, and frightened even. But at the same time, she was a little excited. Not only because successfully slaying the demon would finally allow her to grasp the key of awakening, which she had been trying to do for many years, but also because of the challenge itself. She always felt the pleasant rush of adrenaline when facing appalling abominations in battle. To be strong, to be able to protect herself and other people, that was what she wanted, and why she had accepted the ominous shadow's offer to be her teacher. Rain smiled.
What is there to be nervous about? It's just an awakened demon.
Her teacher laughed in the darkness.
Fair enough.
There was a bit of silence, and then Rain asked, against her better judgment,
Teacher, what was the first awakened demon you fought like?
The darkness spoke in a tone of nostalgia.
Oh, that guy. As tall as a house, covered in a carapace of impregnable steel armor with claws strong enough to crush diamonds and a pair of razor-sharp scythes in place of hands. A really charming fellow.
Rain raised an eyebrow. Was such a creature really worth feeling nostalgic about? In the morning, Rain untied the rope fastening her to the branch and carefully climbed down. Soon enough, she reached the ground, standing on the outskirts of a vast forest of dead trees. Ravenheart was so far away that the mountain chain was merely a dark line on the horizon. There was no ash around, although the frozen ground was covered in frost. There was no snow either. This was the place where the awakened demon she was intending to kill dwelled. Humanity had conquered a vast area in the Dream Realm, but that did not mean that the two domains were entirely safe. In fact, safety was a fleeting illusion here. Apart from the citadels and their immediate vicinity, the wilds were still ruled by the nightmare creatures. Humans had only really started to encroach on their reign after the advent of the Dream Gates 4 years ago, building roads and expanding their settlements. In that regard, the current era was very much like the dawn of the legendary Age of Heroes, when mortal champions battled against countless abominations to help the nascent human civilization survive and spread. Of course, modern humans had no gods to guide them. They only had Queen Song, the King of Swords, and the Nightmare spell. Well, in Rain's case, she also had an odd ball of a shadow showing her the way. While she was checking her weapons in the dim twilight of the early dawn, her teacher asked calmly,
What makes demons so dangerous? Their strength? Their speed? Their resilience?
Rain shook her head.
No, it's their intelligence. Beasts and monsters might be stronger, faster, and much more resilient than me, but they are also not too bright. The demon, however, is as intelligent as me. It might even outsmart me if I'm not careful.
Her teacher emerged from her shadow and nodded.
So, how do you kill a demon?
She counted her arrows while answering.
By being more prepared, by controlling the battlefield, knowing the terrain, and learning about the enemy in advance, by taking initiative and not making any mistakes, by having a clear mind and a deadly resolve.
He smiled.
No one is perfect. Mistakes happen whether you want to or not. So what are you going to do if you make a mistake?
Rain stared at him for a moment, then returned the smile defiantly.
Curse you bitterly while I die?
Her teacher laughed.
Go on and try dying. See what happens.
She stared at him for a bit, then shook her head.
Fine. Since the teacher insists, I won't die.
He nodded with a smile.
Good. Now go kill that demon.
Rain had taken off her winter coat, her light armor, and even her military jacket, leaving only the Henley and the wool vest on. No amount of armor was going to protect her from the awakened demon, so she wanted her movements to be as agile and unobstructed as possible. It seemed a little poetic, as if she was proclaiming that there would be no retreat, only victory or death. It was also a bit funny. Awakened warriors were often shown preparing mentally for battle while donning their armor, but she was doing the same while taking it off. Such was the pitiful life of a mundane hunter. The preparations had long been complete. The traps were laid. All Rain had to do was venture into the depths of the forest and face the demon. Taking a deep breath, she went through a series of stretching exercises. She had always been nimble, but after years of training under the sinister shadow, her flexible body was like that of a snake. No, a gymnast. A very graceful, limber gymnast. That was a much better mental image. Still, she had to be careful when going all out. Her mundane flesh was lagging behind her skill and training, so it was easy to damage.
What are you, a ballerina?
Rain glared at her teacher silently.
Didn't you once tell me that you're the best dancer in the world, even? So, who's the ballerina?
He coughed.
Well, if your teacher said it, then it's true. There was this one time I danced with a princess at a ball, and immediately after, she dragged me into a private room. No, wait. Or was it me who dragged her into a private room? In any case, the two of us ended up in a private room.
Her teacher smiled wistfully.
And let me tell you what happened in that room. It was nothing short of life-changing.
Rain stared at him for a moment, then pretended to be sick.
Old pervert.
He was offended.
Who are you calling old? No, wait. Who are you calling a pervert?
She did not deign to answer, shaking her head silently. At the same time, though, Rain noticed that her previous nervousness was almost entirely gone. She felt calm and ready, as if her teacher's familiar nonsense could magically make any situation, no matter how dire, seem mundane and ordinary as well.
That's all right. It's infused with mine.
Rain nodded, then collected the things she was going to leave behind and placed them in a nook between the roots of the old tree, to be retrieved later. Her original sword went atop the neat pile. She stood up, looked into the depths of the forest, and started walking. As she did, her teacher spoke.
That sword should be able to cut the flesh of an awakened demon, even in your hands. Still, don't rely on it too much. Remember, the sword is just a tool. You are the weapon. You are the one who has to kill the enemy, not your sword.
Rain nodded calmly.
I remember.
She cleared her mind of all distractions, focusing solely on the hunt. The demon she was going to kill was called the Huntsman, quite ironically. That was what the people in Ravenheart called him, but actually, the creature's proper name was Chalice Knight. The reason why Rain and her teacher had chosen him was precisely because there was a lot of information to be learned about the Chalice Knights. These abominations were not independent nightmare creatures. After all, they had been mid-rank minions of a fallen titan. The titan's territory used to be about 100 kilometers away from this forest. Coincidentally, it lay between Ravenheart and one of the other large cities of the Song domain, preventing the construction of a convenient road. A year or so ago, Song Seishan had battled the Titan and destroyed it, obliterating most of its minions in the process and scattering the rest. Rain remembered that event well, because there had been a series of missions issued by the town hall in the aftermath of the battle, all having to do with hunting down the remnant abominations. She wasn't quite strong enough to challenge them, but many awakened cohorts were, so the surviving minions of the slain Titan had been swiftly eradicated. All except for one Chalice Knight, who had found his way into this forest. Despite the fact that the abomination had lost its monstrous steed, thus becoming much weaker, he still managed to decimate several cohorts that ventured into the forest to kill him. Perhaps there was something special about this particular demon, or perhaps the awakened warriors had come unprepared. In any case, they were forced to retreat, and the oddly fearsome Chalice Knight earned a foreboding nickname, the Huntsman. Rain did not consider herself to be stronger than the awakened fighters who had tried to slay the creature in the past. However, she was definitely much more cautious and prepared than they had been. So she was going to hunt the Huntsman. Once she did, her essence would awaken, and she would be able to start forming a soul core. And once her soul core was formed, then, finally, she would be stronger. The Huntsman was so dangerous because he ruled the forest like a stealthy predator. He moved unseen and attacked from the mist and darkness, picking off his victims one by one. He also seemed to know the value of intimidation and mental pressure, displaying the mutilated corpses of his victims on the branches of the ancient trees for everyone to see. Or maybe skinning corpses simply spoke to the abomination's aesthetic sensibility. In any case, his human enemies often faced him already shaken and rattled, which was a deadly poison for anyone going into battle. Rain knew that she was approaching the creature's lair because she saw a human skeleton hanging in the trees, its bones clattering against each other in the wind. Her expression darkened. However, she wasn't shaken. She wasn't rattled either. Her mind was much too strong to be poisoned by fear. Instead, fear only sharpened it.
I'll need to bury them properly after everything is over.
She shivered. Not because of the morbid scene, but simply because she was cold. The battle would warm her up, though, so it was all right. Every time an awakened cohort ventured into the forest, the Huntsman was in no hurry to attack. Sensing the threat presented by a group of experienced awakened warriors, he stalked them silently, or retreated into his lair, waiting for the night to come. Then, when impenetrable darkness shrouded the world, his own hunt would begin. Rain was not a cohort of awakened warriors, so she was pretty sure that the demon would not wait to attack her. It was for the best. She knew that if she failed to slay the enemy before nightfall, her chances of survival would drop to 0. And yet, the Huntsman had not shown himself yet. What was he waiting for? She frowned, then glanced at her shadow.
Could it be that the demon is afraid of you, teacher?
A calm voice resounded from the darkness.
It is highly unlikely. I am very hard to notice when I'm hiding in the shadows. There is a much simpler explanation, don't you think?
Rain nodded. Indeed, there was. The Huntsman was not omniscient after all. He simply had not noticed her yet, which was what she had been hoping for. Rain knew that she wasn't strong enough to face an awakened demon in a direct confrontation, which meant that she had to rely on traps to even the odds. The problem was that even luring such a creature into a trap was problematic, because he was so much faster than her.
Well, if he doesn't want to come to me...
She was going to have to announce her arrival. She had been quite angry at her teacher for how vague and confounding his explanations about the meaning of clarity were, but after finally mastering it, Rain finally understood every word. Master the body, master the mind. The essence of combat was murder, and every action she took in combat only served one of two purposes: to kill the enemy, or to prevent the enemy from killing her. Something like that could not be explained with words, only learned in battle. However, once Rain truly understood that unfathomably deep but simple truth, every battle she had fought after that was easier. Time seemed to slow down as her perception expanded. Her thoughts accelerated, and at the same time, the scope of the world grew narrower, eliminating all unnecessary distractions. She could feel every minute detail of her environment with striking sharpness, from the direction of the wind to the slowly dancing snowflakes. Down below, the almost invisible menace slowly approached the bonfire she had made with wet branches and the butchered corpse of a dormant beast she had laid as bait. It was time to strike. There was no way back anymore. Drawing her bow, she finally allowed her gaze to fall directly on the empty space where the huntsman was supposed to be, and let the arrow fly. Rain had thought that her shot was immaculate and almost impossibly swift. From the moment she knocked the arrow to the moment she let go of the string, less than a heartbeat passed. And yet, frighteningly, that single heartbeat was enough for the demon to react. She couldn't see his movements, but the vague patch of subtly hazy air shifted at an impossible speed. The arrow flashed past, but that was all right. Rain had not been aiming at the invisible abomination anyway. Instead, she aimed at a burlap sack hanging above the bonfire. The arrow split it open, and fine powder poured into the air. It was not gunpowder, nor was it some expensive alchemical concoction. It was simple flour. However, when the cloud of flour ignited, it still produced a fiery flash. That flash couldn't be called a proper explosion, really, since there was no closed vessel to contain it, but it still served its purpose. That was to cover the huntsman in soot. Suddenly, his invisible form was not that invisible anymore. In fact, whatever camouflage the creature had been using was broken by the rain of burning flour, and Rain finally saw the huntsman in all his vile glory. The Chalice Knight resembled a human wearing a tattered suit of ancient armor that had turned green from rust. He towered at around 2.5 meters in height, but seemed even taller because of the deer antlers attached to his closed helmet. The rusty helmet itself was fashioned to resemble the snout of a snarling beast, with deep darkness nestling in the crack of its visor. There was moss growing here and there on the battered armor, and a ragged cloak, too weathered to retain any color. Hanging from his shoulders like a torn banner, the creature was holding a frightening battle axe in his hand, its blade large and heavy enough to easily split a human in two. The huntsman was like a dead knight that had crawled from under the roots of the forest that had laid claim to an ancient battlefield, ghastly and imposing enough to make Rain shudder. Worse than that, the dark crack of his visor was already staring directly at her. Her soul seemed to squirm under that gaze.
Crap.
Rain knocked another arrow on the string and prepared to draw her bow. But before she could, the huntsman had already reached the base of the tree that served as her sniper nest. His dreadful battle axe rose and fell. That dreadful strike was enough to make the mighty trunk of the ancient tree explode into a hurricane of splinters, obliterating a whole swath of it. But a moment later, a sharp arrow fell from above and lodged itself into his knee. It struck precisely at the narrow gap between the bottom of the abomination's cuisse and the top of his pollen, which were the armor elements responsible for protecting one's thigh and knee respectively. A pretty decent shot, considering the situation. But Rain did not have any time to celebrate, because the tree was already toppling, and she was falling with it. After a moment of weightlessness, the rope tied around her chest drew taut, and she found herself flying through the air. If there was one thing her teacher had told her, it was that one should always leave themselves a path of retreat. Rain had never considered that climbing a tree would protect her from an awakened demon, so she naturally prepared a way to escape. In this case, that way was swinging on a rope and flying between the trunks of terribly tall trees at breakneck speed. She had not carried a sizable length of silken rope all the way here in vain, at least. As the wind whistled in her ears, Rain thought,
This is going to hurt.
She really did not know if she would be able to escape his axe long enough to accomplish her goal.
Run, run.
Gritting her teeth, Rain did the unthinkable. She tossed away her bow. That was a terrible loss, not because she was afraid to lose it, but because the quiver of arrows she had hidden up ahead would be useless without it. But she had to sacrifice something, and her javelin seemed much more useful in a battle against such a large foe. As for her sword, her teacher had given it to her. She would never discard it. She felt incredibly lucky about leaving her coat and armor on the outskirts of the forest.
Run, goddammit you.
Rain did not have eyes in the back of her head, but she could feel the ground trembling and hear the branches snapping behind her. In fact, the huntsman was barreling directly through the trees, snapping the mighty trunks like matches. It was as though an unstoppable, inescapable behemoth was pursuing her, getting closer and closer. He was already no more than a dozen meters away. A dozen meters, 10 meters, 6 meters. Rain's heart was beating wildly in her chest. But then, finally, the trees receded, and she escaped into a vast open space. That was where she had wanted to fight the demon.
Be prepared. Control the battlefield. Know the terrain. Learn about the enemy. Take the initiative. And don't make any mistakes. Have a clear mind and deadly resolve.
That was the recipe for winning a battle against a demon. Any battle, really. So this was the battlefield that Rain had chosen. The open space in front of her was a swamp that hid in the depths of the forest. Currently, it was frozen over, the treacherous depths encased in a layer of ice. The ice was covered by a thin carpet of snow. Rain was light enough to walk on the surface of the ice without falling under its surface. The huntsman, though, with his frightening size, heavy armor, and dreadful battle axe, was going to have a bit of a problem. Feeling death approaching her from behind, Rain did not waste a single moment and stepped onto the hidden ice. Rain was ready to step on the ice when something inside her screamed. Perhaps it was because of the subtle change in the sounds behind her, or perhaps it was because of the change in the currents of the wind. Perhaps she had subconsciously noticed the shadow moving unnaturally around her. In any case, she didn't hesitate even for a split second before throwing her body down. An experienced warrior did not allow themselves to be ruled by instinct, but they also never ignored it. A warrior's instinct was the result of countless hours of training and rich battle experience after all. Blood, sweat, and tears went into honing it into a life-saving tool. Rain dodged, and in the next moment, her side was pierced by a flash of blinding pain. She spun in the air and crashed into the ice, throwing herself into a roll. A moment later, Rain was already on her feet, sliding back as she held the javelin between herself and the enemy. A muffled groan escaped her lips. The huntsman was spinning his grotesque battle axe, a few drops of blood marring its heavy green blade.
Damn it.
Rain briefly glanced down to assess the damage. It wasn't anything serious. The axe barely grazed her, leaving a long cut across her ribs. But if she had been even a little bit slower, it would have split her open like a log.
More stitching.
It was a little absurd that she was more upset about having to mend her bodysuit than about receiving a wound. Her body was much more resilient than the threadbare bodysuit after all.
You bastard.
As soon as the words left her mouth, the demon took a step forward. Suddenly, they were surrounded by silence. The huntsman entered the vast clearing, his armored boot sinking into the snow. Simultaneously, Rain backed away from his towering figure. They were like a fearsome predator and its powerless prey. The predator preparing for a lethal lunge. The prey raising its quills in a vain hope to save itself. The heavy javelin usually gave Rain confidence, but in front of the dreadful master of frozen forest, It seemed like a fragile willow branch. It all happened very fast. As the demon was advancing, his foot fell through the ice, and in the next moment, he plummeted down. Black water and pieces of ice flew into the air as if there was an explosion, and Rain felt the swamp tremble. Cold drops pelted her face. Of course, water alone was not going to slow the huntsman down. A human would have been rendered helpless by the need to struggle against its weight, but an awakened demon was powerful enough to shrug such a burden off without any effort. At that distance from the shore, the water was only to the huntsman's waist, so he continued moving forward after a momentary delay. But still, it wasn't a lake or a river. There was no ground under his feet, only the treacherous mass of the ancient swamp. Although the abomination managed to prevent himself from sinking for now, its speed still dropped. More than that, the moment he fell through the ice, Rain was already moving. And before the huntsman could regain his bearing, the heavy tip of her javelin had already crashed into his helmet. She did not get greedy with that attack. Greed was the third most common cause of death among experienced fighters, following directly behind arrogance and bad luck. After delivering a strong blow to the demon's face, immediately pulled back and jumped away. And just in time, a split second later, his axe whistled past the spot where she had stood before, colliding with the ice and splitting it. The attack was much too fast for her to perceive and react in time. If Rain had not anticipated the danger and disengaged in advance, she would have died. Her side burned with cold pain, but that pain only made her mind sharper. Her heart was beating steadily, pumping blood through her body. Her muscles seemed to have come alive, making her body light and alert, brimming with energy. It was a state of absolute focus and awareness, so heightened that it couldn't last for long.
Let's see which one of us is the real demon.
Brandishing her javelin, Rain grinned and escaped the cracking ice, already searching for a way to deliver another blow to the frenzied abomination. Less than a minute later, a vast swath of the frozen swamp had turned into a ravaged scene of devastation. The pure white snow was washed away, the ice was broken and shattered, its shards floating in the black water like dirty glass. The water itself was restless, boiling and rippling from the furious movements of the huntsman and the escaping gas. The swamp was trying to swallow the frenzied abomination, but was getting battered by him instead. The demon would sink deeper from time to time, but then tear himself from the insidious embrace of the marsh. Even though that struggle allowed Rain to survive so far, it was not enough to grant her victory. She was breathing laboriously. Rain had continued to retreat deeper into the swamp, and the demon continued to pursue her like a demented executioner. She had delivered more than a dozen strikes to him, but none dealt any serious damage. Even when her javelin pierced the cracks of the huntsman's armor, it felt as if she was trying to cut wet fur. Rain did do some damage to the hidden flesh of the demon, but not nearly enough to matter. At the same time, her own body was not faring well. She had not been cut by the dreadful battle axe again, so there was little blood, relatively speaking. However, there were bruises. In fact, after being tossed around by the furious power of the demon's blows, Rain felt like her entire body was one giant bruise by now. And that was even considering that she fought as cautiously and cowardly as she could. The huntsman had much longer limbs, and his battle axe had much more reach than the black sword her teacher had given her. So even if Rain was willing to risk clashing with the abomination face to face, despite being slower and weaker than him, he would have held a great advantage. Stories like to speak about exalted skill and unbreakable resolve, but in a real fight, the outcome was often decided by the most mundane things. Reach trumped skill, and weight definitely trumped will. Well, perhaps it was different for the awakened, whose power refused to obey common sense. But for someone like Rain, having a longer weapon meant emerging victorious more often than not, which was why she did not draw her sword yet, relying instead on the heavy javelin.
It's all right.
Her javelin was crafted from the same material as her arrows, and it was not as if a mundane human could not leave a scratch on the body of an awakened abomination. In fact, it was entirely possible to slay one, just a bit hard. Things would have been different if Rain was facing a fallen nightmare creature. But then again, she would never have allowed herself to end up in such a situation. Her teacher tasked her with slaying an awakened demon precisely because it was not impossible for her to succeed. It was just that the huntsman had proven to be much tougher than she had anticipated. Rain had expected to be powerless against his armor, but even when she managed to bypass it, the result was minimal. It was as though there was another layer of protection hiding behind the suit of rusted green armor. Something had to change. His voice suddenly resounded from the shadows.
Wait, what are you doing, ungrateful brat? That's my most expensive bottle, you know?
Rain ignored the startled voice and produced a brass lighter. She wasn't fond of drinking anyway. No, really. What had he been thinking giving a young girl alcohol? What kind of attitude was that for a teacher? Had her teacher been a delinquent in his youth? Igniting the cloth, Rain stood up and swiftly turned around. The huntsman was barreling toward her like a frenzied icebreaker. He had long torn her javelin from his chest and snapped it in two, leaving the broken pieces far behind. For a moment, her heart ached for her trusty weapon. Then, Rain gritted her teeth and tossed the bottle at the demon.
Catch this, you rusty piece of...
The huntsman did not even bother to move his axe, swiping the bottle away with his gauntlet. Of course, it shattered instantly, spilling burning alcohol all over his towering figure. The flammable cocktail was not going to damage an awakened demon, but that stench in the air. There was a lot of gas trapped beneath the ice, and currently, all of it had been released, surrounding the abomination like an invisible cloud. And when the bottle shattered, the cloud instantly turned into a sea of raging flame. Of course, Rain did not see any of it, because she was already diving behind the twisted tree. Swamps had a natural inclination to produce methane, which often remained trapped beneath the surface, forming voluminous bubbles of putrid gas. And those were only the swamps of the waking world, which were much safer than the marshes of the dream realm. Well, at least they had been before the dark times. In times of war, humanity had unleashed all kinds of weaponized horrors upon itself, so today there was no telling what kind of buried plagues could be released into the world if someone went around digging in the swamps of Europe or the Northern Quadrant. The dream realm might have actually been safer in that regard. None of it mattered to Rain, though. What mattered to her was that methane was highly flammable. And so, when the huntsman shattered the liquor bottle, it ignited.
Crap!
Diving behind the tree, Rain pressed her body into the ground and covered her ears. In the next moment, she was momentarily blinded by a violent flash. Then, she was assaulted by unbearable heat. And then the entire world shuddered. Rain was tossed into the air as the tree she had been hiding behind was obliterated. That was not supposed to happen. Marsh gas could ignite and burn, but not explode, and especially not so fiercely. At least, not under an open sky. Perhaps the flames somehow reached a huge pocket of trapped methane, or perhaps it had something to do with the pockets of gas sticking to the surface of the ice. Perhaps the entire swamp was anomalous, and the gas she had set aflame itself was unnatural. In any case, the result of tossing the liquor bottle surpassed Rain's expectations. By a lot. Crashing into the ground, she felt the wind being knocked out of her and let out a suffocated groan. Rolling in a mess of limbs, Rain fell into shallow water and came to a halt.
That hurt.
She was hurt and dazed, but there was no time for such frivolous things as pain and disorientation.
Didn't think so. Well then, I'll just have to kill you, bastard, right here.
A split second later, she was already moving. Of course, the huntsman was moving as well, and a lot faster than her, despite weighing at least 5 times as much. But Rain knew how he was going to act and where he was going to move. It was not because she had a prophetic gift or could read the abomination's mind. It was simply because she understood his physical limits from doing her research and observing him in battle, as well as because of her knowledge of combat. She knew how to wield a polearm and how one proficient in the use of a great axe would most likely attack. She knew all the elements that comprised such a suit of full-plate armor, how they were fastened to one's body and to each other, and what limitations to one's movement they would cause. She knew that the demon would favor his right leg because his right knee was not damaged, and that he would protect the left side of his chest more since the breastplate there was cracked, and the flesh beneath had already been pierced by her javelin. Most of all, she knew that the huntsman was boiling with demented wrath. That mad frenzy clouded his judgment and made his actions more predictable. So, she had a few advantages of her own. As the flames danced and the small island quaked from the heavy burden of the demon's footsteps, she dashed forward and met him with a flash of her black sword. The harrowing battle axe would have split her in two if she had not sidestepped at the last moment. Rain had managed to evade the attack, albeit just barely. Still, the length of the axe and the huntsman's arm length were too great for her to strike at the towering abomination. But she had not aimed at the demon's mighty body. Instead, she aimed at the axe. Just as the fearsome weapon flashed past her, the black sword fell in pursuit and severed the charred shaft cleanly. It had avoided the metal bands reinforcing it and bit into the burned wood, slicing through it as if it was butter. The axe blade sunk into the muddy soil, and the huntsman's balance was suddenly disrupted without its weight. Now holding only a severed shaft in his hands, the demon staggered and fell heavily to one knee. The ground quaked. In that moment, Rain could finally reach his body with her sword. The enemy was in front of her, kneeling and momentarily vulnerable. Who knew how long that vulnerability would last? The demon would most likely regain his bearing a heartbeat later. Everything inside Rain screamed for her to attack, to throw her body forward and slay the abomination before that happened. After all, she could not be sure that there would be another chance later. Adrenaline flooded her bloodstream, and her heart thundered feverishly. Her pupils widened, her mind drowning in excitement, fear, and frenetic urgency. But at the same time, the memory of the teacher's arrogant voice rang in her ears.
Bruise? What do you mean it will leave a bruise? Listen, disciple, you should be grateful to your kind, gentle teacher for educating you so tenderly. The last time I made such a mistake, I was stepped on by a mountain. Now that left a bruise.
It was the mark of a skilled warrior to keep a cool head in the middle of the fiercest battles. And so, she suppressed her excitement, ignored her fear, and cast away her sense of urgency.
Don't be greedy. Greed will get you killed. It is a sin, and only those strong enough to bear the consequences have the right to be sinful.
Rain did not abandon her caution and attacked calmly. The tip of her black sword slid into the seam of the huntsman's breastplate, plunging deep into his side. This time, there was very little resistance. Unlike her javelin, the dark tachi pierced the demon's flesh almost effortlessly. But instead of leaning into the thrust or twisting the blade to wreak more damage, Rain immediately pulled it back and jumped away, and just in time. Although the huntsman seemed momentarily dazed and his weapon had been destroyed, his fist was already tearing the air with stunning speed. If Rain had been a split second too slow to disengage, her head would have turned into a bloody pulp. As it was, she had enough time to block with the dark tachi and receive the harrowing blow on its blade. She was thrown backward like a rag doll, which was the intended outcome. If Rain had been stubborn and tried to stand her ground, her body would have received the bulk of the impact. But by allowing her to be carried away, she dissipated the force greatly. It still hurt like hell. It felt like every bone in her body was about to burst. But they didn't. Rain was tossed back into the shallow water once again and skidded in the mud. The ley water washed away her sweat and numbed the pulsing pain in her side, which felt almost pleasant.
I need to stand up.
This time, it took her a little longer to gather herself. Feeling the mud starting to pull her down, Rain groaned and rolled onto her stomach, then staggered to her feet. The black tachi rose into a high stance, sending drops of dirty water flying.
How badly did I wound him?
None of that mattered to her, though. What mattered to Rain was that from what she knew, the transformation of the Chalice Knights took some time to happen. Even if it was just a couple of seconds in battle, those seconds were like an eternity. She had been waiting to stake her life on that eternity the whole time. As the huntsman's bestial roar reverberated across the burning swamp, Rain dashed forward. Her steps were light and swift. Before the demon could assume his true form, before the echo of the roar was swallowed by the shadows, she reached the kneeling abomination and brandished her black sword. The dark blade hissed coldly as it cut apart the world, and also the huntsman's neck. The darkness nestling in the crack of his visor gazed at her silently as his grow abruptly stopped and the bestial helmet flew into the air, a fountain of dark blood spilling from it in a spiral as it spun. It was a clean cut. The horizontal slash was performed with perfect form, thanks to the countless thousands of practice swings she had performed under the watchful gaze of her tutor. The huntsman's severed head fell into the water and sank into the swamp with a ripple. His towering body swayed slowly and then collapsed. Rain swayed as well and sprawled in the mud next to it. The tension drained from her body, but so did all her strength. She breathed hoarsely, staring at the distant sky. The flames were dying down, but she was still surrounded by terrible heat.
Well, it's good. I won't freeze to death at least.
In the smoky silence that followed, a sudden noise resounded, sounding indescribably misplaced in this hellish scene. It was the sound of applause. Rain tiredly turned her head and stared at her teacher, who had finally deemed it necessary to crawl out of her shadow. His voice was unnecessarily loud.
Congratulations! You have slain an awakened demon, Chalice Knight.
He smiled and added, quieter, his tone turning warm.
Well done.
Rain had just killed an awakened demon, but hearing her teacher's praise was strangely just as validating. Or rather, it made the act of slaying the huntsman feel more meaningful in any case. It was a nice feeling. Too exhausted to move and hurting all over, she simply lay in the mud and rested. Her gaze was directed at the sky, which was as empty as her mind, Feeling too lazy to think, Rain simply stayed still and savored the moment, unbothered by the encroaching cold. By then, the ghostly flames had been mostly extinguished, with only a few small tongues of fire dancing here and there above the ravaged swamp. While she was spacing out, her teacher disappeared somewhere. Soon, he re-emerged from the shadows, carrying her bow, backpack, and other things she had left on the outskirts of the forest. Placing most of it on the ground, her teacher then walked over and carefully covered her with her winter coat.
Here, don't catch a cold.
Rain smiled faintly, enjoying the warmth. Her teacher, meanwhile, approached the corpse of the huntsman, looked at it curiously, and gave it a little kick. Then he circled it slowly, mumbling some nonsense in a hushed tone.
Chalice Knights. Wait, don't tell me. Were these the poor bastards who drank Jade Queen's nectar? Soon there was nothing but bestial need left, huh? They might be. What fools. Even my little sister knows not to drink everything given to her by shady characters.
It's you. You're the shady character.
Rain wanted to scoff, but then decided against it. Instead, she asked,
Teacher, can I awaken now?
She knew the answer, of course, but hearing it again would give her confidence. He smiled.
Well, you've already made great progress and learned how to sense your essence. I'm pretty sure that absorbing the soul shards of this demon will be the final straw and serve as a catalyst to make your essence awaken. Of course, that alone won't make you an awakened.
Her teacher looked at the mud with a finicky expression, then reached into the shadows and pulled an opulent wooden chair out of them. Placing it on the ground, he sat down and let out a satisfied sigh.
The problem is that there will be no vessel to store your essence, and no bridge between your soul and your body. At least, that is how I understand it. However, you will be able to control your essence, and by controlling it, you will be able to create such a vessel, which itself is a soul core. It will require time and effort, but with your level of enlightenment, I am sure that you will manage splendidly. When you do form a soul core, that is when you'll undergo a rebirth and become an awakened.
Rain listened to his voice silently, then sighed.
How long will it take?
Her teacher chuckled.
I have no idea. That wholly depends on you. But from what I'm told, learning to control essence is the hard part. Forming a soul core is relatively easy, albeit tedious. So, a few months? A year? We'll have to wait and see.
I bet I can do it in a day.
Rain didn't voice her defiant thoughts, but smiled.
What comes next?
Sitting comfortably on his luxurious chair, her teacher smiled.
Ascension is a step of rising above one's mortal nature. You will have to accumulate power by improving the quality of both your soul essence and your body. That can be achieved naturally by slowly refining the essence or by slaying powerful enemies. Once your essence reaches a qualitative change, the last step is to reform your soul core. That's a bit tricky.
He shook his head.
The easier part of the process is learning how to access your soul sea. The harder part, sadly, it requires the knowledge of a soul refining technique. In the past, many such techniques were known to us humans, but sadly that legacy has been lost. These days, everyone simply relies on the nightmare spell.
Rain raised an eyebrow.
So, what? I can't ascend? Should I just go and jump into a nightmare?
Her teacher furrowed his brow.
Can't ascend? Who do you think your teacher is? Of course you can ascend. The fact that no one else has a soul-refining technique doesn't mean that I don't, or that I can't invent a new one from scratch.
Rain turned her head and stared at him dubiously.
So does he have one? Or is he going to invent one?
Well, it didn't really matter to her now. She was not even an awakened yet, so ascension seemed distant enough to not feel real. Even the awakening.
Sure. And unlike the spell, I'll even customize it to your liking. More than that, I really don't want to badmouth the competition, but the spell, it really has no imagination whatsoever. Why limit memories to powerful weapons, enchanted armor, and mystical tools? There are so many mundane things that would make for an amazing memory. That bodysuit of yours? I'll memorize it, no problem. You want a pillow that is always cold or a magical toothbrush? Your teacher can make that happen as well.
He looked at her with a smug expression.
Hell, I can even make a roll of toilet paper into a memory. If you don't go overboard, it will never run out.
Why the hell is that bastard talking about toilet paper?
Rain stared at her teacher for a while, then blinked a couple of times.
Are you telling me that you have been able to create memories this whole time?
He nodded.
Strange question, but yes, sure.
Slowly, Rain's blood started to boil.
So why the hell haven't you made me any memories then? Was watching me suffer fun for you?
He glanced at her with an offended expression.
Huh? What are you talking about? I was always planning to arm and equip you. It's just that you are still a mundane human. Until you form a soul core and awaken, your soul can't even contain memories. Blame yourself for being so slow. What's so hard about becoming the first human in history to awaken naturally, huh? Do I ask for much?
She took a deep breath and turned away, staring at the sky again.
What an insufferable cheapskate deity. Who can make memories?
Slowly, a few grandiose thoughts entered her mind. After a while, though, Rain sighed.
Well, it's good enough. Teacher is amazing, sure. I won't have an aspect, but having memories is already great. Receiving them directly from someone instead of earning them from the spell is a little weird, I guess. It's not much different from how legacies inherit memories from their clans, though.
Her teacher frowned, then chuckled suddenly.
Hey, now that I think about it, aren't you a legacy yourself? Your big brother can provide everything a legacy clan can, and much more on top of that.
She looked at him scornfully.
Oh? Teacher is like a legacy clan now? So, do you have a legacy relic then?
He tilted his head with a smile.
A bunch of them, actually.
Rain blinked a few times.
Does he really?
Actually, she wouldn't be surprised.
What about a citadel then?
He grinned.
A citadel? Sure, I have one of those. It's a huge temple built of black marble, shrouded in eternal darkness. Granted, it's a bit of a fixer-upper, but what can you do? My citadel is almost as old as the universe. The ambience there is great.
She stared at him silently.
That's great. Speaking of great, since it's teacher, there has to be a supreme in our clan, no doubt. Should I consider myself royalty? Might as well, right?
Her teacher coughed in embarrassment.
Well, technically our clan doesn't have a sovereign at the moment.
Rain's eyes gleamed with triumph.
His capacity for nonsense has a limit after all.
But we do have a supreme devil. I used to bully the little bastard a lot in the past, but now that he's all grown up, it's not very fun.
I give up.
After a while, Rain felt rested enough to move. She rose from the ground with a grimace and went about taking care of her wounds. Her teacher had made a fire from the splintered remains of the twisted tree, so neither of them had to freeze in the cold. Rain disinfected the cut on her side, then wrapped it tightly in a clean bandage. That would have to do until she returned to Ravenheart and found a healer. Usually, she would have been lamenting the need to pay one, but there was a sizable reward promised to anyone who managed to slay the huntsman. Not only could Rain afford a decent awakened healer, but there would be enough coins left for her to replace the broken javelin, and maybe even upgrade a few pieces of her equipment.
No, wait, actually, I won't need to worry about that anymore.
Rain still had hope of awakening swiftly. Even if she failed to do it before returning to Ravenheart, there would be no more hunts in the next few months. She already had everything she needed to form a soul core. So the best course of action would be to hole up in a safe place and patiently work on becoming an awakened. Once she was an awakened, her mundane equipment would not be of much use. She would be able to draw a much more powerful bow, wear armor crafted from much heavier mystical materials, and even wield memories. Her entire arsenal would need to be changed. She would have to purchase a lot of things. Suddenly, Rain did not feel rich anymore. She was so poor, full of sorrow. Rain put on her winter coat and approached the remains of the huntsman. She stared at it for a while, then glanced at her teacher.
Should we harvest his armor? It should sell for a lot of coins.
He scratched the back of his head.
Who's going to carry it all the way back to Ravenheart, though?
Rain sighed.
How can a deity be so useless? Yeah, still, we should take the axe blade at least, to prove the kill at the town hall.
The axe blade alone would sell for a hefty amount of coins. She fished the giant blade from the ground and attached it to her backpack. Her teacher, meanwhile, looked at the remains of the dreadful Chalice Knight and clicked his fingers. Several shadows suddenly rose from the ground and sliced the carcass apart, cutting the rusted armor like paper. Rain didn't look at the bestial features of the corpse as she harvested the soul shards and sat down, staring at them solemnly. There were 3 of them. The glimmering crystals were not too large, but to her, they meant the world.
This is it then.
She had been striving desperately to reach this moment for 4 long years. Those years had been full of pain and hardship, but also joy, satisfaction, and fulfillment. And now, the final stretch of the road was right in front of her. Her teacher sat on the ground across from her and smiled with encouragement. She could feel a condensed mass of energy slowly forming in the place where her heart would have been. It was not solid yet, but also not as ethereal as the usual state of soul essence, more like a shimmering liquid. At the very heart of that mass, where the pressure was most crushing, something solid was slowly being born. A tiny crystalline gemstone, so small that it could only be called a grain of sand. Rain opened her eyes and shuddered, her entire body drenched in sweat. The whirlpool of essence dissipated, and she sprawled on the ground in utter exhaustion. Her chest rose and fell heavily, as if she had just run a marathon. The mental fatigue was even worse. Her teacher raised a fist.
Success! You did great!
But Rain was full of bitter disappointment.
A single grain of sand? Did I really boast that I'll form the soul core in one try? So embarrassing. Thank the gods I didn't say it out loud.
How long would it take her to create enough of these tiny gemstones for them to merge into a core? A month? A year? Rain wanted to groan. But doing that would undoubtedly make her teacher way too happy. She couldn't let the enemy win. She sighed and then slowly sat up.
I'll stay at home for an entire month and let Mom pamper me and work on awakening slowly.
Disappointed? Who was disappointed? A whole month or even several months of doing nothing and being spoiled rotten? No biting cold, no blood, and no sweat. No hideous abominations and revolting corpses. Just eating well and meditating in peace. It was a dream come true. Wouldn't it be great to rest for a few months while being absolutely safe with nothing terrible happening?
It sure would.
Her teacher suddenly looked at her with suspicion. His onyx eyes narrowed.
What is this? I sense a familiar disturbance. Hey, you didn't just think something stupid in your head like, finally the worst of it is over, or that demon is definitely dead, nothing bad will happen. Did you?
Rain raised an eyebrow and put on an innocent expression.
No, why would I? Only a complete fool would think something like that in the middle of a dream realm.
He studied her dubiously for a moment, then exhaled slowly.
Well, Good. And, don't use such harsh words. Some people, very smart people, were known to make small mistakes like that in the past. Anyway, time to head back to Ravenheart then.
Rain collected her things and hoisted the backpack onto her shoulders. The axe blade was terribly heavy, which messed with her balance a little, but she could handle it. The frightful black sword her teacher had given her was already gone, and her tachi regained its shadow. She studied the familiar sword for a few moments, then sighed and sheathed it smoothly. Rain was ready to leave, but she didn't.
Teacher, we might have a problem.
He turned to her and raised an eyebrow in confusion.
A problem? What's the matter?
She hesitated for a moment, then awkwardly scratched the tip of her nose.
Well, you see, that explosion was much more powerful than I had expected, so all the ice is broken. How am I supposed to get back to shore?
He stared at her for a bit, then glanced at the ravaged landscape of the vast swamp. Indeed, the little island was surrounded by nothing except mud and black water, with not a single intact piece of ice in sight. The deadly expanse of treacherous sludge stretched all the way to the distant shore. Her teacher lingered a bit, then sighed and approached her. Crouching, he pointed to his back.
Climb on, brat.
Rain didn't make him ask twice. There were ways to traverse the swamp, but none that were both safe and timely. Not to mention that she had just disinfected her wound and didn't want to get it wet and dirty again. Plus, her battered body was exhausted. Why would she refuse a piggyback ride offered by a powerful deity? Climbing onto her teacher's back, Rain wrapped her arms around his neck and smiled. He lifted her like a feather, not showing any strain at all despite how thin his body looked, and headed for the swamp.
How humiliating. A divine shadow like me being reduced to carrying ungrateful mundane girls. Gods are truly dead.
Ignoring his grumbling, Rain rested her head on his shoulder and allowed her consciousness to drift into a relaxed state. The familiar sound of her teacher's voice was almost like a lullaby. Walking to the edge of the island, he didn't even try to slow down and stepped directly into the muddy water. However, his foot never plunged into the murky sludge. Instead, the shadows moved and coalesced into a glossy black plate under it. Then, another plate appeared as he took a step. Like that, her teacher walked across the swamp as if he was walking on a paved road, the black plates dissipating behind him. After a few moments, the water sloshed and surged, but never managed to touch his leather boots.
That reminds me of the time we fought the drowned in the lost temple of Fallen Grace, back when I was still wearing the Serpent King's crown. Who knew that I would end up becoming a swamp rickshaw one day? Damn, life is sure full of irony.
Rain did not know what the words drowned, fallen grace, and Serpent King meant, but they sounded exciting. Was her teacher a king once, in ancient times? No. Knowing him, it was more likely that he had stolen a king's crown and wore it to gloat and boast about his nefarious deeds. The walk to the shore was both comfortable and uneventful. Rain could have climbed off her teacher's back once they reached solid ground, but he simply continued to carry her without saying anything. And so, she didn't say anything either. Perhaps he saw through her bravado and realized that her condition was worse than she was letting on, and that she was too exhausted to hike through the forest while suffering the pain of her wound. Still, after a while, Rain spoke.
We should take down the corpses of the fallen awakened and give them a burial.
Usually, the queen would have taken the dead, but the huntsman must have prevented them from leaving on a pilgrimage to her palace, and as a result, their bones had been left unattended. Her teacher stopped. Rain couldn't see his face, but she felt the subtle change in his mood. Suddenly, the shadows populating the frozen forest seemed much deeper, and the world felt much darker. Her breath escaped as a cloud of vapor.
Does he not want to bother burying them?
Climb off.
He bent his knees, allowing Rain to stand firmly on the ground. She was a little confused.
As a matter of fact, we have indeed met before, although I doubt that you'll remember. In any case, why don't you and your friends continue onward? Let's part on friendly terms and go our separate ways. How about it?
There was another lengthy silence. Shivering, Rain heard a strange rustle come from the direction of the three strangers. Their surroundings were slowly turning colder.
What was that rustle?
How about it? How about it? How about it?
Master Sean's voice still sounded human, but his speech had turned strangely incoherent. Another voice joined, its mannerisms and intonations too similar to the first.
We are on our way back to Ravenheart. These are my companions, Master. We are on our way. How about it?
Rain was still stuck on her previous thought, unable to throw it out of her head.
What was that rustle?
She had never heard a sound like that before. Just at that moment, the disturbing rustle grew louder, and a third voice added amicably,
These are my companions, my companions, my companions. That rustle. How about you become my companions too?
Her teacher took a deep breath. Rain could hear his voice turning dangerously cold.
Listen here, bastard.
She had never heard such coldness in his voice before, and the unfamiliarity scared her.
You might have managed to claw your way out of Dread's tomb, but so did I. You might have survived in the depths of 1,000 hells, but so did I. So save me the theatrics and be on your way. Otherwise, I'll stop being gracious and skin you alive.
Rain shuddered.
Skin him?
Suddenly, a thought flashed in her mind.
The Skinwalker.
The great abomination that had been the nightmare of humanity for the past 4 years. A great abomination. 3 of the indescribable horror's vessels, no less. Her terror was so vast that she couldn't even move. All Rain could do was keep her eyes closed and tremble.
I'm dead. I'm so dead.
No, death would be a mercy. At that moment, Master Sean, Skinwalker's vessel, spoke with a hint of curiosity in his voice.
You. Whose companion are you?
Her teacher scoffed, and then the world quaked. And then Rain was suddenly enveloped by absolute darkness. It was as if an impenetrable wall rose to surround her from all sides. The deafening cacophony of terrible sounds coming from the outside was muffled and dampened by that wall, and nothing but slight tremors reached her, for the moment at least. She was safe, but those sounds... Feeling a cold dread grasp her heart, she took a shaky breath and tried to comprehend them. There was the sound of trees snapping. There were the screams of the air being torn. There was the roar of the ground being upturned. These were the sounds that she could recognize, but there were other sounds as well. Inhuman howls, chilling groans that sounded like the world itself was weeping, eerie and revoltingly organic rustling, as if a mountain of flesh was ripping as it expanded while consuming itself, and many more that Rain simply could not describe and was too afraid to fathom. The ground was shaking violently, and she was struggling to stay standing. Her fingers turned white on the hilt of her sword.
Teacher, be safe. Please.
But how could anyone stay safe when facing the Skinwalker? Countless people had fallen to its menace and were consumed, becoming vessels of the abomination's corruption. Mundane humans, Awakened masters? Even saints. Not even the sovereigns could eradicate this living curse. Shrouded by darkness, Rain realized how painfully weak and helpless she was. Just a few moments ago, she had been full of pride, praising herself for slaying an awakened demon. But now, she remembered that in the world of the nightmare spell, she was nothing but an ant. An ant who couldn't even do anything when her teacher was fighting to protect her.
I want to be strong.
She had not changed at all. She was still the same girl who had been powerless to protect herself, let alone anyone else, when the tide of nightmare creatures descended on her school. The world continued to scream and quake for several minutes. Then, an eerie silence suddenly enveloped it. The tremors stopped, and the terrible sound ceased. Rain remained motionless, keeping her eyes closed. She didn't dare to think about how the battle had ended. The thought of imagining her teacher not being there anymore was too appalling, more appalling than what would happen to her if he was truly gone. Suddenly, the wall surrounding her disappeared. She knew that it had because light suddenly shone through her eyelids, and cold winds scraped against her face. The air was permeated by the smell of wet wood and soil.
Please.
A moment later, a familiar voice spoke from somewhere near.
Brat, you can open your eyes now.
The relief Rain felt at that moment was strong enough to make her sway. She slowly opened her eyes and looked around, then froze in shock.
No way.
The frozen forest was gone. All of it was very mysterious, but at the same time, Rain understood the underlying meaning of what her teacher had said.
Something that we were not supposed to see. Got it. Promising that I won't tell anyone is not going to work, I guess. So just how big of a secret is it?
Her teacher's face was a little somber.
Big enough for Clan Song to erase any witness from existence. Well, not any witness, but a mundane girl with no backing. They won't hesitate to silence you, even for a split second.
Rain felt a cold chill run down her spine.
Damn. The royal clan?
Why would Clan Song pay attention to someone as small and insignificant as her? She gritted her teeth and looked at him stubbornly.
I do have backing, though. My father works for the government. His rank is pretty high now, too. Surely Clan Song won't want to spoil their relationship with the government because of something like that.
Her teacher smiled wistfully.
The naivety of youth. First of all, you are overestimating the significance of your father's position. Second of all, you are overestimating the significance of the government. And lastly, you are underestimating Clan Song. Who says that anyone would be able to prove anything after they make you disappear?
His smile turned colder.
In fact, they won't even have to make you disappear, technically. There's a guy among them who is much worse than the Skinwalker. He can destroy your soul and wear your body like a suit. Coming to family dinners and gossiping about boys with your mother, no one will suspect a thing.
Rain shuddered. Slowly, the magnitude of the trouble she had gotten herself into was starting to dawn on her.
Crap.
Who had made her think all those stupid things earlier? Spend months in absolute safety? Rest and relax while working on awakening at a leisurely pace? Be pampered at home? She had been such a fool. Rain cursed quietly, stared at the three corpses for a while, and then asked her teacher in a hopeful tone.
So, what do we do?
Her teacher was whatever it was that he was. He had to have a solution, without a doubt. Suddenly, she felt a lot calmer. Her teacher remained silent for a while, then smiled.
What to do indeed. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, Rain, but you can't show your face in Ravenheart for a while. You'll have to disappear before they make you disappear. We need to go somewhere where they won't be able to find you quickly and spend some time there.
She closed her eyes and asked, her tone turning a little grim.
Where can I even go? Even if I can survive a solo journey to another citadel, there is no city in the Song domain where the royal clan doesn't have eyes. Crossing into the Sword domain is not an option. Not that I would want to leave my family behind. I can't return to the waking world without the help of a saint, and even if I could, locating me there would be even easier.
Her teacher scratched the back of his head with a thoughtful expression. He lingered for a while, then glanced at her with a strange expression.
What about one of those road crews? They are safe enough for you to survive, with more than enough mundane humans for one more to not draw attention. And best of all, far removed from all citadels. They're lacking manpower too, so no one would ask any questions. If I were you, I'd get myself hired as a laborer there and hide in the crowd.
A sly smile appeared on his face. Her teacher remained silent for a moment, then added with a chuckle.
In fact, wasn't there a huge crew being assembled to construct a road east? You know, to Godgrave. Why don't you join that one?
Rain sighed.
Why not indeed? Mom! Mom! Mommy!
Effie patted Jax on the head and smiled. What do you want, Dumpling? She was sitting in a comfy wooden chair, staring at the wooden ceiling absent-mindedly. The little boy cuddled comfortably on her lap, hugging her like a little monkey. He looked up at her with his bright eyes and grinned sheepishly. Effie laughed. Story? Which story? Jax was suddenly very thoughtful. He remained silent for a while, a comically concentrated expression on his face, and then beamed.
Mommy defeating the giant?
She hugged him and shifted slightly, and then, in a deep voice, all right, listen then. A long time ago, in a faraway land, 6 evil saints imprisoned Hope in a tall tower. Hope was very lonely in the tower and cried bitterly. So your mom and her friends decided to defeat the evil saints and rescue her. The image of the damp stone cell under the chalice temple flashed in her memory. The smell of blood, the whimpers of the other girls, who the war maidens, driven to madness by the demon of desire, were slowly training to death. The graveyard of swords surrounding the ancient temple. She chased the ghastly memory away and smiled warmly. Noctis, the wicked warlock of the East. Uncle Kai, who was a brave warrior from the Ivory City back then. Auntie, who was a wise priestess of the Night Temple. And of course, your mom, who was a little girl. These were the 4 heroes who ventured to rescue Hope. Oh, and there was someone else as well. A nameless shadow who had escaped its master and become friends with Noctis. Effie only had a vague recollection of the shadow devil who had followed Noctis, but it seemed rude not to mention him. Her adorable son giggled. Huh? What's so funny? Ling Ling giggled again.
Mommy is not little. How can Mommy be little?
She smiled. I was actually a little kid once too, you know. Actually, I was a little kid twice. In any case, after we, the 4 heroes, met each other and swore to save Hope, the evil saints learned about it and sent a messenger to scare us. It was a huge giant, as tall as a mountain, with a body made of polished steel. But your mom and her friends weren't afraid at all. That was because the kind priestesses of the goddess of life had taught me the secret art of slaying evil giants, you see. Effie continued to tell the fairy tale version of her second nightmare, just as she had done 100 times before. For some reason, The story was one of Jax's favorites, maybe because the very idea of his mom being a little girl excited him endlessly. She had no idea why, but looking back, it had indeed been a bit exciting. Effie had spent her actual childhood either in a hospital bed or in a wheelchair, so getting a taste of what it meant to be a healthy kid was special, even if it was in the depths of a ghastly nightmare. Of course, she had removed all the distasteful parts from the story, replacing them with fantastical and exaggerated adventures, flying ships, eccentric sorcerers, fire-breathing dragons, and a happy ending. The sugar-coated version of the Nightmare of Hope had everything one needed for a great fairy tale.
And so, dropped the flying ship right on the evil giant's head. The ship shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the giant fell down, making the ground shake. Auntie was perfectly fine, of course. She had jumped away just in the nick of time and glided down with the help of a magical rapier. A huge shadow was still.
Just then, the door opened, and a handsome young man walked into the room. Way too handsome, even. Effie smiled at her husband and took a breath, and exhaled slowly, trying to maintain a relaxed expression.
Daddy!
Jax jumped off her lap and ran to hug his dad. Luckily, this time, he remembered to control his strength. Picking up the boy, Jax's dad smiled at him and then glanced at Effie. He was hiding it well, but she could see that the smile did not reach his eyes.
Go get ready.
With that, she turned to her husband and son, putting on a bright smile.
Shall we go?
She took her husband's hand, and a moment later, the three of them disappeared from the meadow. Instead, they appeared in a room with alloy walls, situated in the depths of a government fortress. The furnishings were sparse, but there was a large screen displaying the arid landscape of the western quadrant on one of the walls. Jax looked at the sand dunes with interest.
Daddy, what's that?
His dad smiled.
This is a desert, Wolfie. We are in the western quadrant. Aren't you a lucky kid to get to travel all around the world and see all kinds of places?
The boy was thoughtful for a moment.
Daddy, aren't you a little silly? It's a picture. Jax has seen lots of pictures already.
Effie's husband laughed.
I guess you are right.
He glanced at Effie and nodded. She remained silent for a bit, then patted Jax on the shoulder and said in her usual carefree tone,
Dumpling, Mom has to go to work now. Be a good boy and listen to Dad, okay?
He grinned and waved at her absent-mindedly.
Bye, Mommy. Have fun at work.
A second later, Jax was already asking his dad about deserts and sand. The handsome young man exchanged a poignant look with her, silently mouthed 3 words, and then took their son out of the room. Outside, a high-ranking government envoy was already waiting for them. Left alone, Effie took a deep breath and said quietly,
I love you too.
Then, the smile slowly disappeared from her face, replaced by a grim expression. She remained motionless for a while, then nodded and summoned her armor. Soon her athletic figure was covered by a skin-tight layer of polished metal, as if she had been dipped in liquid steel. She also summoned the Starlight Shard, shaping it into 2 strips of white cloth. One was tied around her waist, the other covered her chest. Effie was ready for war. Well, as much as anyone could be ready for war, which, in her experience, was not much at all. Picking up the black beast locket, she hung it around her neck and walked to the door. In the corridor outside, 2 figures were waiting for her. An annoyingly stunning man with auburn hair and green eyes, and a chillingly beautiful woman with pale skin and raven black hair. Effie erased the grim expression from her face and smiled mischievously.
Hey there, handsome. Oh, and you too, Kai? Guys, you won't believe what I saw in Bastion. Princess found herself a boyfriend. At least I think that she found him. She might have just kidnapped the poor man to do unspeakable things to him. I don't know.
She froze suddenly, looked behind her with a cautious expression, then relaxed visibly and added in a quieter tone,
I know I would, if I wasn't such a prim and proper virtuous married woman.
Just a few minutes later, a majestic dragon with scales that resembled the midnight sky was flying over the endless sea of dunes, devouring distance with stunning speed. Effie and Jet were on his back, looking south with somber expressions. After a while, Effie sighed.
The situation has already changed?
Jet nodded.
Yes, the city wall is breached. Western Quadrant defense forces are on approach, but the Call is wreaking havoc with their tech. The awakened Vanguard was attacked by one of the lesser Gate Guardians and managed to put it down, but their advance was stalled, so we will arrive first.
Soul Reaper maintained a neutral tone, but Effie could see that she was in a grim mood.
It's not your fault. Don't beat yourself up too much.
Jet glanced at her and smiled.
My fault? Of course it's not my fault. I am not someone who feels bothered by such things anyway.
Despite her tough girl routine and carefully constructed facade of a cynical salarywoman, she was bothered. Effie had gotten to know Soul Reaper Jet a bit during the Southern Campaign, but they became really close during the Third Nightmare, and in the 4 years since. Their friendship and comradeship had continued to blossom. Jet was a professional first and foremost. She wasn't really someone with a bleeding heart. The opposite, actually. But she took her responsibilities very seriously. As such, her cynical loyalty to the mission of preserving humanity was quite ironically much greater than the noble intent of most ardent idealists. She had already been doing her very best as a master, but now that Jet was a saint, one of the 5 saints serving the government, the scale and scope of her responsibilities were much greater. While Effie and Kai mostly dealt with military and diplomatic issues, simply executing the orders, Jet was much more knowledgeable and experienced. As such, she was involved in the administration and decision-making process of the government, influencing what orders all of them received. The government was in turmoil too. It was in flux, drifting on the currents of history. 4 years ago, the higher echelons of the government had made a decision to throw vast resources into rapidly developing its presence in the dream realm, where the future was. That was why Effie was almost permanently stationed in Bastion, while Kai spent most of his time in Ravenheart. Jet, however, had been against that strategy. She had insisted on keeping the government saints in the waking world spread across the 3 remaining quadrants, to lessen the inevitable losses as much as possible, even at the cost of the future inferiority of the government's position in the brave new world of domains and sovereigns. It was not that she disagreed with the notion that the future of humanity lay in the dream realm. It was just that she advocated for a different allocation of resources. Sadly, she had failed to turn her opinion into policy. If she had, the current disaster could have been avoided, or at least lessened. Effie sighed.
You're angry. I can smell that you're angry. Well, guess what? There's nothing better for treating anger than a good slaughter. And we'll be drowning in abominations in a few minutes, so there's no day like today.
Jet chuckled.
You're right. Sure. But also, let's not use the word slaughter, okay? Makes me queasy.
At that moment, Kai's pleasant voice resounded in their heads. Ladies, if you feel queasy and are going to be sick, please wait until I land. At least, really, don't go around despoiling my scales. I have an image to uphold. Effie grinned.
Oh, what about your image? Who are you trying to impress? Queen Song's daughters?
Effie cracked her knuckles and asked, her voice uncharacteristically somber,
A great devil. Can we handle something like that?
All 3 of them had become immensely powerful after transcending. The battles they had won were beyond count, and the nightmare creatures they had killed were beyond measure, and yet they had never faced a horror like that before. Only the sovereigns had. Facing a great devil was a first for them, and could very well become a last. A relaxed smile appeared on Jet's face.
What's the matter? If push comes to shove, we'll just die. Well, the two of you will die. I'm already dead.
Above them, the dragon scoffed. His magnificent voice resounded above the desert, making Effie's heart tingle. That was just something Kai's draconic voice did, even if he did not use his aspect abilities. Still, we should try to stay alive. Well, Effie and I should. You just stay in one piece, Lady Jet. She chuckled.
All right. As we've discussed before, Kai will support the Western Quadrant forces in their advance. Effie and I will spearhead the assault, push back the abominations, and engage the Gate Guardian. There's nothing else to say. Godspeed.
The beautiful dragon nodded its great head, then pushed himself off the ground and glided gracefully toward the assembled army. Jet looked at Effie, already summoning her scythe. She lingered for a moment, and then said in a tone that was a little gentler than usual,
But seriously, don't die, Effie. Nightingale and I can die, but you can't. You know why. There are people waiting for you to return.
For a moment, Effie felt her heart tremble, just like it did every time she went into battle. It had been easy to risk her life before, when she was young, but now she had things to protect, and people whom she did not want to and could not allow herself to leave. Every time death snarled in her face, Effie felt guilt and shame and fear. What was she doing on the battlefield when her husband and son were somewhere else, waiting for her? Why was she being so stupid when she could have remained safe behind a citadel wall in their idyllic cottage, allowing someone else to fight and bleed and die in her place? But then she remembered. It was precisely because of Jax and his dad that she was here. Because someone had to prevent the world from collapsing on their heads and burying them under the rubble. Effie didn't particularly trust someone else to not mess everything up, so she had to build a world where her son could live a decent life with her own two hands. Thankfully, her hands were quite strong. If you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself. Looking at Jet, Effie grinned.
Why do you always talk about dying, big sister? Not everyone is like you. I'm not planning on kicking the bucket anytime soon. That would be such a tragedy. Imagine all the food I would not be able to eat.
Laughing lightly, she shook her head and activated her transformation ability. A moment later, a titanic figure clad in polished steel rose from the dust, shining brilliantly under the incandescent sun. Rain had just killed an awakened demon, but hearing her teacher's praise was strangely just as validating. Or rather, it made the act of slaying the huntsman feel more meaningful in any case. It was a nice feeling. Too exhausted to move and hurting all over, she simply lay in the mud and rested. Her gaze was directed at the sky, which was as empty as her mind. Feeling too lazy to think, Rain simply stayed still and savored the moment, unbothered by the encroaching cold. By then, the ghostly flames had been mostly extinguished, with only a few small tongues of fire dancing here and there above the ravaged swamp. While she was spacing out, her teacher disappeared somewhere. Soon, he re-emerged from the shadows, carrying her bow backpack, and other things she had left on the outskirts of the forest. Placing most of it on the ground, her teacher then walked over and carefully covered her with her winter coat.
Here, don't catch a cold.
Rain smiled faintly, enjoying the warmth. Her teacher, meanwhile, approached the corpse of the huntsman, looked at it curiously, and gave it a little kick. Then he circled it slowly, mumbling some nonsense in a hushed tone.
Chalice Knights. Wait, don't tell me. Were these the poor bastards who drank Jade Queen's nectar? Soon there was nothing but bestial need left, huh? They might be. What fools. Even my little sister knows not to drink everything given to her by shady characters.
It's you. You're the shady character.
Rain wanted to scoff, but then decided against it. Instead, she asked,
Teacher, can I awaken now?
She knew the answer, of course, but hearing it again would give her confidence. He smiled.
Well, you've already made great progress and learned how to sense your essence. I'm pretty sure that absorbing the soul shards of this demon will be the final straw and serve as a catalyst to make your essence awaken. Of course, that alone won't make you an awakened.
Her teacher looked at the mud with a finicky expression, then reached into the shadows and pulled an opulent wooden chair out of them. Placing it on the ground, he sat down and let out a satisfied sigh.
The problem is that there will be no vessel to store your essence, and no bridge between your soul and your body. At least, that is how I understand it. However, you will be able to control your essence, and by controlling it, you will be able to create such a vessel, which itself is a soul core. It will require time and effort, but with your level of enlightenment, I am sure that you will manage splendidly. When you do form a soul core, that is when you'll undergo a rebirth and become an awakened.
Rain listened to his voice silently, then sighed.
How long will it take?
Her teacher chuckled.
I have no idea. That wholly depends on you. But from what I'm told, learning to control essence is the hard part. Forming a soul core is relatively easy, albeit tedious. So, a few months? A year? We'll have to wait and see.
I bet I can do it in a day.
Rain didn't voice her defiant thoughts, but smiled.
What comes next?
Sitting comfortably on his luxurious chair, her teacher smiled.
Ascension is a step of rising above one's mortal nature. You will have to accumulate power by improving the quality of both your soul essence and your body. That can be achieved naturally by slowly refining the essence or by slaying powerful enemies. Once your essence reaches a qualitative change, the last step is to reform your soul core. That's a bit tricky.
He shook his head.
The easier part of the process is learning how to access your soul sea. The harder part, sadly, it requires the knowledge of a soul-refining technique. In the past, many such techniques were known to us humans, but sadly that legacy has been lost. These days, everyone simply relies on the nightmare spell.
Rain raised an eyebrow.
So, what? I can't ascend? Should I just go and jump into a nightmare?
Her teacher furrowed his brow.
Can't ascend? Who do you think your teacher is? Of course you can ascend. The fact that no one else has a soul-refining technique doesn't mean that I don't, or that I can't invent a new one from scratch.
Rain turned her head and stared at him dubiously.
So does he have one? Or is he going to invent one?
Well, it didn't really matter to her now. She was not even an awakened yet, so ascension seemed distant enough to not feel real. Even the awakening.
Sure. And unlike the spell, I'll even customize it to your liking. More than that, I really don't want to badmouth the competition, but the spell, it really has no imagination whatsoever. Why limit memories to powerful weapons, enchanted armor, and mystical tools? There are so many mundane things that would make for an amazing memory. That bodysuit of yours? I'll memorize it, no problem. You want a pillow that is always cold or a magical toothbrush? Your teacher can make that happen as well.
He looked at her with a smug expression.
Hell, I can even make a roll of toilet paper into a memory. If you don't go overboard, it will never run out.
Why the hell is that bastard talking about toilet paper?
Rain stared at her teacher for a while, then blinked a couple of times.
Are you telling me that you have been able to create memories this whole time?
He nodded.
Strange question, but yes, sure.
Slowly, Rain's blood started to boil.
So why the hell haven't you made me any memories then? Was watching me suffer fun for you?
He glanced at her with an offended expression.
Huh? What are you talking about? I was always planning to arm and equip you. It's just that you are still a mundane human. Until you form a soul core and awaken, your soul can't even contain memories. Blame yourself for being so slow. What's so hard about becoming the first human in history to awaken naturally, huh? Do I ask for much?
She took a deep breath and turned away, staring at the sky again.
What an insufferable cheapskate deity. Who can make memories?
Slowly, a few grandiose thoughts entered her mind. After a while, though, Rain sighed.
Well, it's good enough. Teacher is amazing, sure. I won't have an aspect, but having memories is already great. Receiving them directly from someone instead of earning them from the spell is a little weird, I guess. It's not much different from how legacies inherit memories from their clans, though.
Her teacher frowned, then chuckled suddenly.
Hey, now that I think about it, aren't you a legacy yourself? Your big brother can provide everything a legacy clan can, and much more on top of that.
She looked at him scornfully.
Oh? Teacher is like a legacy clan now? So, do you have a legacy relic then?
He tilted his head with a smile.
A bunch of them, actually.
Rain blinked a few times.
Does he really?
Actually, she wouldn't be surprised.
What about a citadel then?
He grinned.
A citadel? Sure, I have one of those. It's a huge temple built of black marble, shrouded in eternal darkness. Granted, it's a bit of a fixer-upper, but what can you do? My citadel is almost as old as the universe. The ambience there is great.
She stared at him silently.
That's great. Speaking of great, since it's teacher, there has to be a supreme in our clan, no doubt. Should I consider myself royalty? Might as well, right?
Her teacher coughed in embarrassment.
Well, technically our clan doesn't have a sovereign at the moment.
Rain's eyes gleamed with triumph.
His capacity for nonsense has a limit after all.
But we do have a supreme devil. I used to bully the little bastard a lot in the past, but now that he's all grown up, it's not very fun.
I give up.
After a while, Rain felt rested enough to move. She rose from the ground with a grimace and went about taking care of her wounds. Her teacher had made a fire from the splintered remains of the twisted tree, so neither of them had to freeze in the cold. Rain disinfected the cut on her side, then wrapped it tightly in a clean bandage. That would have to do until she returned to Ravenheart and found a healer. Usually, she would have been lamenting the need to pay one, but there was a sizable reward promised to anyone who managed to slay the huntsman. Not only could Rain afford a decent awakened healer, but there would be enough coins left for her to replace the broken javelin and maybe even upgrade a few pieces of her equipment.
No, wait, actually, I won't need to worry about that anymore.
Rain still had hope of awakening swiftly. Even if she failed to do it before returning to Ravenheart, there would be no more hunts in the next few months. She already had everything she needed to form a soul core. So the best course of action would be to hole up in a safe place and patiently work on becoming an awakened. Once she was an awakened, her mundane equipment would not be of much use. She would be able to draw a much more powerful bow, wear armor crafted from much heavier mystical materials, and even wield memories. Her entire arsenal would need to be changed. She would have to purchase a lot of things. Suddenly, Rain did not feel rich anymore. She was so poor, full of sorrow. Rain put on her winter coat and approached the remains of the huntsman. She stared at it for a while, then glanced at her teacher.
Should we harvest his armor? It should sell for a lot of coins.
He scratched the back of his head.
Who's going to carry it all the way back to Ravenheart, though?
Rain sighed.
How can a deity be so useless? Yeah, still, we should take the axe blade at least, to prove the kill at the town hall.
The axe blade alone would sell for a hefty amount of coins. She fished the giant blade from the ground and attached it to her backpack. Her teacher, meanwhile, looked at the remains of the dreadful Chalice Knight and clicked his fingers. Several shadows suddenly rose from the ground and sliced the carcass apart, cutting the rusted armor like paper. Rain didn't look at the bestial features of the corpse as she harvested the soul shards and sat down, staring at them solemnly. There were 3 of them. The glimmering crystals were not too large, but to her, they meant the world.
This is it then.
She had been striving desperately to reach this moment for 4 long years. Those years had been full of pain and hardship, but also joy, satisfaction, and fulfillment. And now, the final stretch of the road was right in front of her. Her teacher sat on the ground across from her and smiled with encouragement. She could feel a condensed mass of energy slowly forming in the place where her heart would have been. It was not solid yet, but also not as ethereal as the usual state of soul essence, more like a shimmering liquid. At the very heart of that mass, where the pressure was most crushing, something solid was slowly being born. A tiny crystalline gemstone, so small that it could only be called a grain of sand. Rain opened her eyes and shuddered, her entire body drenched in sweat. The whirlpool of essence dissipated, and she sprawled on the ground in utter exhaustion. Her chest rose and fell heavily, as if she had just run a marathon. The mental fatigue was even worse. Her teacher raised a fist.
Success! You did great!
But Rain was full of bitter disappointment.
A single grain of sand? Did I really boast that I'll form the soul core in one try? So embarrassing. Thank the gods I didn't say it out loud.
How long would it take her to create enough of these tiny gemstones for them to merge into a core? A month? A year? Rain wanted to groan. But doing that would undoubtedly make her teacher way too happy. She couldn't let the enemy win. She sighed and then slowly sat up.
I'll stay at home for an entire month and let Mom pamper me and work on awakening slowly.
Disappointed? Who was disappointed? A whole month or even several months of doing nothing and being spoiled rotten? No biting cold, no blood, and no sweat. No hideous abominations and revolting corpses. Just eating well and meditating in peace. It was a dream come true. Wouldn't it be great to rest for a few months while being absolutely safe with nothing terrible happening?
It sure would.
Her teacher suddenly looked at her with suspicion. His onyx eyes narrowed.
What is this? I sense a familiar disturbance. Hey, you didn't just think something stupid in your head like, finally the worst of it is over, or that demon is definitely dead, nothing bad will happen. Did you?
Rain raised an eyebrow and put on an innocent expression.
No, why would I? Only a complete fool would think something like that in the middle of a dream realm.
He studied her dubiously for a moment, then exhaled slowly.
Well, good. And, don't use such harsh words. Some people, very smart people, were known to make small mistakes like that in the past. Anyway, time to head back to Ravenheart then.